So today's daf yomi is Sanhedrin Nun Sanhedrin 58, and the daf is dedicated for Shemir for the Chayalim Matzah for the Shvuyim and Yeshua for Am Yisrael and the day's Torah. And the daf we're going to start on the bottom of 57b, 2 lines from the bottom. Mara's record the position that Rabbi Yochanan says that according to Rabbi Meir, that we've said it, that according to Rabbi Meir, any death which of Bnei Yisrael, which a Yisrael would be put to death for by a court, that the idolaters are also prohibited not to do. They're musar on it. They're warned about it. And the implication is that if it would be a death from heaven called kares, if that would be that type of prohibited relationship, then the Ben Noach and the idolater would be allowed to, or not the idolater, but the Ben Noach, the Noahide would be allowed to have those relations. Even though Tosfos says elsewhere that nowadays the Noahides have already taken upon themselves these prohibitions, even by the kares penalty. But the Gemara now asks the question, 2 lines from the bottom of 57b, the Savar Rabbi Meir kol erva shebezit shayisrael memisin ala ben Noach musar. Does Rabbi Meir really have the position that any prohibited relationship which a Ben Noach, which a Yisrael is put to death for by a court, a Ben Noach is warned about? But Tanya, but didn't we learn in the Brisa? In the Brisa, which has a different version of Rabbi Meir. Ger shahaital raso shalobatusha. Let's say there's a convert, and the specific case is he was conceived before he was Jewish. He was born after his mother had converted, so he's considered not Jewish because he was conceived when he was not Jewish. Yeshlo she'ara'im, ve'lo she'ra'av. He's considered to have maternal relatives, but not paternal relatives. Meaning to say that rabbinically, we say, even though Rashi says that a convert that converts is like a newborn person and he has no relatives, we say rabbinically that he's not allowed to marry any of his maternal relatives who were born to him before he converted, And the reason Rashi says is because it says, Al kinyazo vish es aviv v'imo. And so therefore, aviv is understood to be the achos aviv, imo is the achos imo. So Rashi learns it out from this verse. And what's the reason why rabbinically we make this prohibition? Rashi says because it can't be that you go from a kedusha kala to kedusha chamura and have something that becomes permitted for you. Because it can't be that there would be a relationship that was permitted to him while he was not Jewish, and that was prohibited to him while he was not Jewish. But now that he's Jewish, is going to become permitted. So since he was prohibited to the maternal relatives while he was a Noahide, so therefore he's going to remain rabbinically prohibited. And so therefore the Gemara says, what's the example? So this Hakeitzad Nasa Choso Minaim. Let's say once he marries his maternal sister, Yotzi, he has to divorce her. Mina'av, but if it's his paternal sister, Yekayim. He's allowed to remain married to her. Achosa Av Minaim. Let's say it's his father's sister. It's his father's maternal sister. Even that, Yotzi, he has to divorce her. Mina'av. If it's his father's paternal sister, Yekayim, then he can remain married to her. Achos ha'em and ha'em. His mother's maternal sister, Yotzi, has to divorce her. Achos ha'em and ha'av. But if it's his mother's paternal sister, so it has, on one end it's through his mother, but on the other end it's her paternal sister, Meir styles Yotzi, you still have to divorce her. Chum say that in that case, they'll have to remain married to her. And Meir Omer, and now we say, Rameir continues, call erva shehi mishum she'er, any erva, any prohibited relationship that comes from being a she'er aim, a relative of the mother, Yotzi, then you have to divorce her. Mishum she'er av, but if it's a relative of the father, Yukayim, he's allowed to remain married to her. Mutter be'eshes achiv, and he's allowed to remain married to his wife's, to his brother's wife, and to the brother of his father, and the wife of his father's brother, and all the other prohibited relationships are permitted to him. Suya comes to include Ashes Avin. This comes to include even also his father's wife. Nasa isha obita. If he marries a woman and her daughter, kones achas and motzi achas. He can remain married to one, and the other one he has the divorce. But really, he shouldn't even marry that one. Mesa ishto. Once his wife dies, mutter b'chamoso. He'd be allowed to marry his mother-in-law. The ikadamri atzer b'chamoso. And others say it's prohibited also to his mother-in-law. So how is this a question? So Rashi says, Rashi explains, we'll look at the Rashi, mutar b'achosi be'ishes aviv. If he's allowed to marry his brother's wife, vafil mi'imo, even his maternal brother's wife, u'achar misa, or after death, vafil nasa achiv mishin iskayer, and even if his brother married her after converted, o nasa kashukuti mishkayer kaima, even if he married her after his brother after he had converted. Because there is no prohibition of an Ashes, not a brother's wife for Ben Noach, and we don't have to be concerned that maybe because it was always prohibited to the Ben Noach. So, hold on one second. So okay. So the question Rashi explains is the last of the middle lines. Rashi says, it says, the Katani Mias, it says in this price, mutter be'eshes aviv, he's allowed to marry his father's wife. Even though a court of the Jews will put to death somebody for marrying their father's wife, and also his mother-in-law. And also in the other way, there's another question. It says he's prohibited to marry his sister and his father's sister and his mother's sister. And even though the court of the Jews does not put you to death on them. So this is inconsistent with Rabbi Meir's position. So says Rabbi Yehuda, lo kasha. It's not difficult. How Rabbi Meir, we would Rabbi Lazar, how Rabbi Meir, we would Rabbi Akiva. There's Rabbi Meir is recording the position of his teachers. In one case, he records his position. Rabbi Meir are two different teachers. One was Rabbi Eliezer, and one was Rabbi Akiva. And so therefore, the first price is going to be the position of Rabbi Akiva, and the second brisa, that's the position of Rabbi Eliezer. So the Gemara says, how do we know this? Titania, al ken yazovish esaviv esimo. A person should leave his father and his mother, v'davak b'ishto v'ayul basar echad, and cleave to his wife, and they'll be for one flesh. So Rabbi Eliezer says, aviv, when it says in the pasuk he should leave his father, it means achos aviv. It doesn't mean his father, it means his father's sister. Imo means achos imo. The Noahide is not allowed to marry his mother's sister. Rabbi Akiva says, aviv means ashes aviv, his father's wife. And imo mamish. And imo means his actual mother. B'davak, and it says he cleaves the lo b'zachar, and not to a male. B'ishto, so a Noahide is prohibited to in homosexuality. B'ishto, his wife, below b'eshes chavero, a Noahide is prohibited to have adultery with one's friend's wife. V'ayul basar echad, so, and they have to be one flesh. Mishanas and basar echad, they become one flesh. Yotzu behema, v'chaya she'nas and basar echad. It excludes, you're not allowed to have relations with an animal because they won't become one flesh. Now, Amar Mar, oh, Boker Tov. So we now analyze this statement. Rabbi Eliezer says, Aviv achos aviv. What we said, we're on the Brisa on 58a, around 10 lines from the bottom. That the Brisa says, Rabbi Eliezer says, when it says in the verse, a man should abandon his father and cleave to his wife, it says, Rabbi Eliezer says, when it says father, it means that Noahide is not allowed to marry his father's sister. But that may be Amos of the Gemara Aviv Mamish. It means he can actually not marry his father at all. The Gemara says, no, Hainu v'davak lo b'zachar. That's already excluded because of the prohibition of homosexuality. Chavero, excuse me, Hainu be'ishto, v'lo be'ishes, I skipped one. Ema ishes of Hainu be'ishto, so maybe when it says Aviv, it means his father's wife. So the Gemara says, no, Hainu be'ishto, v'lo be'ishes chavero. That's excluded from the fact that he's not allowed to marry, that he's not allowed to have adultery with somebody else's wife. Emo achar misa. But maybe it's telling us this prohibition that he also can't marry his father's wife even after his father dies. The Gemara says, no, dumya de imo. No, it has to be similar to his mother. Ma imo bilav ishus, just like his mother. Just like his mother. So the Gemara says, dumya de imo. Ma imo bilav ishus. Just like the word imo comes to tell us it's a prohibited relationship that is not through marriage. So too, we're going to say Aviv is the lav ishus. It's a prohibited relationship, not through marriage, and that's his father's sister. Then the Gemara says, Imo, that Rabbi Eliezer said when it says he's prohibited to be with his mother, it means achos imo, his mother's sister. Imo mamish, maybe it means his actual mother. The Gemara says, no, hainu beishto vo beishes chavero. No, his actual mother, it comes from the prohibition through his wife and not through the wife of his friend. Maybe it means that he can't be with his mother after his father dies. The Gemara says, no, dumya to aviv. It has to be similar to his father. Ma aviv bilav ma'amish, just like the prohibition of when it says father in the verse, Rabbi Eliezer says it's not as actual as father. It means the sister of his father. Afimo bilav ma'amish. It's not actually referring to his mother. So that's the position of Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Akiva, who we said his position is that noahide are prohibited in anything which a Jew would get the death penalty for. Rabbi Akiva says aviv eshes aviv. Rabbi Akiva says when it says father, it means his father's wife. Ema aviv mamish. Maybe it means his actual father. Hainu v'davak. No, that's excluded because his father's a male. V'davak lo b'zachar. If that's the case, eshes aviv nami hainu beish. So maybe when it says his father or his wife, why wouldn't we know she's already prohibited because of adultery? So wouldn't we know it anyway? So it's telling us even after his father dies, she's prohibited. Imo, when it says in the verse, Imo, his mother, Rabbi Kiva says, Imo mamish, it's his actual mother. So the rest says, well, isn't that his father's wife? No, so it's teaching us Imo manusa, so that even if his father never married her, if he's just with her out of wedlock, she's still going to be prohibited. What's the nature of the dispute between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer? Rabbi Eliezer's of the position that aviv dumya de imo, imo dumya de aviv, that it's the same type of relationship that we're referring to. But the prohibition that learned that from father is similar to the one from mother, and so too. And so therefore, lo mishkachas, and you only have this ela ba'achva. You only have this when you talk about siblings, meaning to say the sisters, the father's sister and the mother's sister. And that's why Rabbi Eliezer says when it says aviv imo, it means the sister of the father and the sister of the mother. Rabbi Akiva mutav ukmei. Rabbi Akiva prefers to establish that the verse is talking about eshes aviv, about the father's wife, the ikri ervas aviv, because she's called the erva of his father, ervas eshes avicha, and not to say it's referring to the father's sister, afuki achos aviv, the she'er aviv ikri, ervas aviv lokri. She's called the relative and not an erva. So now the Gemara wants to prove from a verse like Rabbi Akiva. Again, Rabbi Akiva's position is that if it's a misa, if it's a death from a court, then the noahides are prohibited. But if it's a kares, they're not. So Rabbi Akiva, so Tashma, we're going to try and prove from Moshe Rabbeinu's parents, because it says Vayikach Amram es Yocheved Doda, so that Amram, Moshe's father, married his aunt. Meaning to say, my love, aren't we talking about a case where Dodaso Menahim, he marries his maternal sis, his maternal, his father's sister. So it's aren't we talking about a case that he's marrying his father's maternal sister? Isn't that what we're talking about? And we see it's allowed. So this is therefore not like Rabbi Eliezer. It's going to be like Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara says, no, it was Dodaso Mina'av. No, it's his father's paternal sister, not his father's maternal sister. Gemara again wants to prove, but this time he wants to prove like Rabbi Eliezer, not like Rabbi Akiva, because it says, Tashma, it says in the pasuk that Avram said to Avimelech about Sarah, V'gam amna achosi, she is my sister, Bas avihi, acho bas imi. She's my paternal sister, not my maternal sister. Means say I'm allowed to marry her, even though a paternal sister is going to be put to death by even though, so Miklah, from the fact that Avram said he can marry his sister because she's his paternal sister, it proves the Basa Masura that a maternal sister is prohibited, but that's just a liability of Kares, not death from the court. So according to Rabbi Akiva, the maternal sister should be allowed. So this is a question of Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara says, so Have, do you really think that Sarah was Abraham's sister? Bas Achiv Have, she was his niece. She was the daughter of his brother Haran. And since that's the case, she's always permitted. Niece, a man is always allowed to marry his niece. So a woman cannot marry her nephew, but a man can marry his niece. So therefore, Sharia. Ella must be Hasam Hachikamu. This is what Abraham was saying to Avimelech. Kurva dachos isli bahada me abba v'lo Eva. He says, I have a relationship with her, she's related to me because we're the sons of, through my brother from one father, but not through the mother. Tashma. So again, wants to prove like Rabbi Eliezer that even Kari's penalties would be prohibited to the Noahide. Tashma. Why did Adam not marry his daughter? Now, I could have thought of other reasons, but because, he had a good wife. What is the reason why you need to get a new daughter? We should have discussed it. Really, maybe she was Chayav Misa, and she was only saved because how else would they populate the world? So the Gemara says, well, why didn't he just marry his daughter? So, Kadesha Yisa, Kain Esachoso. Because if he would have married her, then Kain would not have been able to marry his own sister. And it says, because I said the world will be built through kindness. Meaning, say the beginning of the world has to be built with kindness that God do with Kain. That Hashem commanded Adam to do kindness for Cain, and so therefore Adam did not marry his daughter. He left her for Cain to marry, and so we see from here that Hashem allowed Cain to marry his sister, and so this, but otherwise it would have been prohibited. So this is a proof against Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara says no, so that wouldn't have been prohibited. The Gemara says no, just the opposite. Even the Ishtri, since she was allowed to marry Cain, we see from here Ishtri that Ben Noach is allowed to marry their sister because, like Rabbi Akiva says, it's only a kares and not chayim and not misa from a court. So then the Gemara says Gemara wants to give another explanation. Kuti mutar babito. So Rav Huna says the Kuti is allowed to marry his daughter. Tosfos point, like I said at the beginning, Tosfos says that nevertheless, he says nowadays they don't have this practice anymore. And it's obviously nobody would say that it's allowed today, even for Noahide. So why didn't Adam marry his daughter? He wanted to make the kindness for Cain. Some say Kuti is prohibited to marry his daughter. And Teda, I'll prove it to you, because Adam did not marry his daughter. Well, it's not a good proof. What's the reason Adam did not marry his daughter? Because we wanted Cain to marry his sister. Okay, so now Amar Chisda, Eved Mutar V'imo, an Eved, a Canaanite slave of a Jew, so such a person has circumcised and immersed in the mikvah, he's allowed to marry his mother, Mutar V'bito, but he could also marry his daughter. How so? Yatzamikal Kuti, because he's no longer a Kuti, and so therefore he no longer has the prohibitions of a Ben Noach who's prohibited to marry his mother. Or Klal Yisrael, but he's still not into the category of a Jew, and so therefore he's not fully converted, and so therefore he's not, and so we haven't made the decree that you're not allowed to get a leniency by becoming Jewish, and so therefore he can marry both his mother and his daughter. Let's say there was a Noahide that has designated a slave woman for his slave, and then afterwards this Noahide decides to have relations with her. Neragla, he's killed. What's the okay? Obviously, he's not doing a nice thing, but what's exactly the prohibition? So some sources say, Rashi says on 57a, he says he's not killed because of adultery, because they never had a formal marriage, but he's killed because of the prohibition of theft. Me'emas, at what point is she going to be considered like the wife of the slave? So Rav Nachman midikarla Ravisa deplanya. Once they start going out and people start calling her this man's wife. At what point was she permitted? Meaning, say, when is there a divorce? When she uncovers her head in the marketplace, because all the married women used to cover their head, Jew and non-Jew. So we discussed this. There's two ways of having, or at least two ways of having, intercourse. One is kedarka, that's the typical way, and then there's shalo kedarka. So if a Noahide is with his wife, shalo kedarka, he's liable for death. As it states, v'davak, he's supposed to be with his wife in the normal manner. But if he does it in shalo kedarka, he's liable. How's it possible that a Jew is not chayiv for this and a kuti is chayiv for this? How could that be? So the Gemara says, if a ben Noach is with his wife's friend, shelo kedarka pater. It means say just the opposite. If he commits adultery, but it's shelo kedarka, he's exempt. My time of ishto bo beishas chavero v'davak v'lo shelo kedarka. So they learn out from the verse that it says v'davak, but so not shelo kedarka. But anyway, we see from here that a Jew shelo kedarka is permitted. So there's a problem, because in Yevamos it says that it's prohibited in Yevamos 34b, because it's considered to be the actions of Er va'onen from Genesis chapter 34. It's Yevamos 34 and Genesis 38, excuse me, 38, I think. So Gemara says, so Tosfos says, so what's prohibited only if you do this regularly, because you don't want your wife to become pregnant and to take away her beauty. But if it's just ba'akrai, if it's irregular, then it's going to be permitted. Let's say an idolater struck a Jew, chayav misa. The idolater is liable for death, because it says by Moshe, after he saw that an Egyptian man was hitting a fellow Jew, it says, Moshe looked this way and that way. She saw there was no man. And he struck down the Egyptian. So he killed the Egyptian because he killed the Jew. One who strikes the cheek of an Israelite, it's like you're striking the cheek of the divine presence. As it says in Mishlei, Mokesh Adam Yala Kodesh. Somebody who strikes the cheek of his friend, who's called a person, it's like you're striking God. So now we have the next is Magbia Abdo Shabbos Siman. So we have some very, very significant teachings. Somebody who just lifts up his hand to his friend, even though he didn't actually strike him, Nikrash. Just lifting up your hand, you're called wicked, as it says. But Moshe saw that there two people from amongst the Jewish people who are fighting. So he says, he says, why are you striking your friend? So Moshe saw in Egypt that there were two people fighting, and he says, why are you striking your friend? So it doesn't say why are you hitting, but rather why will you strike? Even though he didn't strike him yet, he's called wicked. And Amar Ziri, Amar Bechanina, Nikra Chote, he's called a sinner. He's called a sinner. So how so? Because it states by the children of Eli that they wanted to take the sacrifices before the portion was separated to Hashem. It says, "V'mlo lakachti v'chazakah." Take it by force, meaning say, "I'll force you to give it to me." And their sin was very great. His hand will be cut off, as it says, Uzroa Ramah Tishaver. It says the arm that you typically raise, you'll have to cut down. And Rafuna Katzia, the Rafuna cut off the hand. How do they do it? That's not what a punishment. We see this several times in the tractate that you have that they had the ability to do extrajudicial activities in a time of extenuating circumstances. So one understanding of the story is he literally cut off the hand of a friend of a person who was typically striking other people. Rabbi Elazar says, no, that such a person should be buried, as it says, the ish for a person who's a strong-armed man, he gets the land, meaning bury him. Amar Rabbi Elazar, no, that refers to something else. Who's going to be a real estate mogul, landowner, a strong guy? As it says, the ish zero aretz. Amar Reish Lakish, my says Reish Lakish, what do we do with the pasuk? Oved admaso yispalach. The person who works the land will be satisfied with bread. Im osa adam atzmo ke'eved adama. The person makes himself like a servant to the land, yispalachem. Meaning to say, if he works hard, then he'll be able to be satiated from the bread. The commentaries learn that this is referring to Torah study. If you work hard Torah, so you'll be able to be satiated from it. An idolater that observes Shabbos is liable for death. How do we know this? Because it says, Yom v'laylo lo yishposu. Day and night they did not rest after the flood. But it means that Noah are commanded not to cease work. And we know that if they're warned about something, that they're put to death for this. So we see from here, idolater is not allowed to observe the Shabbos. Rambam writes he's liable for death, but he's not killed. And we just tell him, don't do it. We say you're liable for death, but we don't punish him. And that's the position on the Meiri. And the Meiri says that we say to him, either you accept upon yourself the burden of mitzvos, or don't create new laws. You can't create new laws. So that's what the Meiri says is the nature of the prohibition. We're worried about people making a new religion. And says Ravina, Afilu Sheni b'Shabbos. Ravina says, even if you do this on a Monday. So the Gemara says, why don't we count this as one of the 7 Noahide laws? No, the 7 Noahide laws are Shev al Taset, sit and don't do it. But Kumma say, but get up and do it, well, Kachashiv. So observing Shabbos is considered a get up and do. Gemara says, Vadin and Kumma Sehu, the Kachashiv. So what about Dinin? So the Gemara says, no, Dinin is both. Kumva say v'shev al tasin. But we see from here that Shabbos, not keeping Shabbos, is a kumva say, because you have to be positive and a positive action in keeping Shabbos. But what's the idea that the Reish Lakish says that idolater who keeps Shabbos is liable for death? So there's a lot of deep spiritual, mystical ideas about this. So the Midrash says that Shabbos is similar to a king and a queen that are sitting and talking. And if somebody wants to insert himself between them, he's liable for death. And so Shabbos is like a sign between God and the Jewish people. It's like they're taking something from us. So the Chazim Sofer says, since the Hashgacha of Hashem and his influence on the world is what keeps it going, and without that the world will be destroyed, he needs to have the shefa over everything in the world. And so therefore this is messing with the cosmos. But I had another idea. It's not a spiritual idea, a historical idea. I was thinking that around the time that this was written, there was a lot of confusion between the Jews and the Christians. The Christians did not yet decide to change Saturday to Sunday. And you could see that people would be observing the Jewish people. They were observing the Jewish faith, but they were Christian. They have their Shabbos table, they have their Shabbos dinner, they have their cholent, they have their tish, but they were worshiping different faith. And so therefore they need to distinguish. And nowadays, the Christians mostly celebrate on Sunday. I mean, maybe there are some who celebrate on Saturdays, but in those days, every Christian was celebrating on Saturday. So they needed to distinguish. And we'll stop here. Go a happy Tu B'Shvat to everyone.